Awesome, we're live. So welcome everyone to Success on the Rocks. This is episode number 1. My name's Leo Johns, your host, and I have an amazing guest with me, Christian. But before we jump into that, I just want to introduce myself really quick, being as this is the first one. I'm a first generation immigrant from Albania. I moved to this country when I was about 5 years old and always kind of had a knack for entrepreneurship, business owners, and have been a business owner since I was 18 actually. So I started when I was in college and I'm currently running a commercial lending business called Capital X Commercial Lending. And what we do is we help commercial real estate investors, we help business owners get financing for their projects, get financing for their businesses. And through that, I've been able to meet a lot of great people like Christian and other guests that you guys are going to see on here. The reason I started this podcast is a couple of reasons. One, because I really enjoy bourbon and business, so this kind of gives me an excuse to do that. And also because, I think that the American dream is kind of dying off a little bit, and it's an important message in this country to push, especially for young people like myself. It's a little confusing right now. A lot of people idolizing politicians, influencers, and different people of that sorts. Whereas, I think the real heroes of this country are people like Christian and my other guest, who are the backbones of this country, entrepreneurs creating jobs and doing different things with their careers. So without further ado, Christian Catron. Christian is a client of mine. He's a good friend of mine, mentor, a husband, a father, veteran. I can go on and on. He's doing some great things in commercial real estate right now, and I think he's going to drop a lot of gems for us today. So, I'm excited to have you. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Leo. This is it's quite an honor being the first guest, and I pray for huge success for what this podcast will do, not just for you personally, but for the impact it'll have on the community and those who come across it. So I'm excited to be here and excited to share my story and sort of what we're doing now.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. So we'll jump right into it. I think a good way to start this off, we were at my Axe Throwing event last night, my company's Axe Throwing event. And I got a chance to talk to your attorney. So, I've worked with this guy in the past before. He's your real estate attorney. And I got a chance to meet him in person. And, you came up in the conversation and he had great things to say about you, of course. But, what really stuck out was he said that, Christian's a brilliant guy and he's never really met anyone that looks at real estate the way you do. Which is true. Even right now in this crazy environment with the interest rates, with inflation, with everything else going on, you guys are very active. You guys are looking at deals, buying deals. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, that and what's going on in your world right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised that he said some good things. We do pay him, so, he's paid to say some good things for us. No, I'm just kidding. Love working with him and his firm. So to jump straight into what we're doing now, and maybe I can actually, before I jump into that, let me just give a little background of sort of my company and who we are, right? So the name of my company is Redeem Investments. We're a real estate investment firm that specializes in ESG commercial real estate and renewable energy projects, right? And so what that means is that we'll take properties that are distressed or underutilized and convert them to a higher and better use. We got our start doing multifamily, Class C, value add multifamily back in 2019, and really have pivoted recently in light of some things that we saw within the demographic landscape as well as the commercial real estate landscape. And so what we've identified is a major arbitrage opportunity that exists within commercial real estate. And so this is sort of my opportunity to kind of divulge and kind of spill the beans as to, I think, what is going to be a highly lucrative opportunity. Nothing that is lucrative or has great potential comes easy. And so there's a lot of work involved with that. But that's really part of the reason why a lot of our investors entrust us, is because we know what we're doing and we're making great strides to do that, and they want to partner with us. But there's an arbitrage opportunity within commercial real estate that we've discovered. And that arbitrage opportunity exists because of a supply and demand imbalance. That supply and demand imbalance is a result of two major demographic trends. The first of which is the hybrid work revolution, right? And what that means is that as a result of that trend, or that demographic trend, is that there are a lot of vacant, underutilized buildings, whether it be office or retail, primarily office right now, because post-COVID, many companies don't want to lease 10, 20, 30,000 square feet anymore. Right. And yet these buildings are well located, beautiful, fairly good condition, but they're just sitting there empty for the most part. We have historic high vacancy rates across most, if not all, metropolitan areas, as well as the suburban markets surrounding those metro areas. And so the question is, well, what do you do with these vacant, underutilized buildings? Well, that's where the second demographic trend comes in, which is called the silver tsunami. And for those who may not know, silver tsunami is really this notion that 1 out of every 5 Americans is over the age of 65, and that demographic continues to increase as more of the baby boomers age into that demographic. And we all know, because of modern medicine, people are living longer. But the longer that people live, the sicker that we get, right? And so ultimately what is happening as a result of all that is there's an inadequate amount of supply or capacity because of this high unmet demand. And so we said, well, why don't we take these empty and vacant buildings, like office buildings, and convert it to a higher and better use and meet the unmet demand that healthcare facilities and medical facilities have. And ultimately, that's what led us to launching our newest investment fund called the Redemption Armor Fund. Armor stands for Adaptive Reuse, which is what we're doing, and Medical Office Realty. And so, yeah, that's effectively what we're doing now. We've closed on a couple of properties already. We're getting ready to close on the next one at the end of September, in a couple of weeks here. And so, excited about what we're doing and what the future holds.
Awesome, man. Well, what kind of made you want to get into real estate investing in the first place?
Yeah, well, so like you, I'm a first-generation immigrant as well. In fact, I tell people I was born on a dirt floor in a third-world country called the Philippines. My father was a U.S.-American sailor who met my mom, and there I was. And unfortunately, he didn't want anything to do with us, and so I grew up with a single mom. God saw fit to connect her with another American sailor who adopted me and brought me to the U.S., and I grew up here. Because of that experience and having a taste for American life and knowing what it's like to be born into poverty and live that life, I felt compelled to give back and serve this country in some way. And so I did well academically, did well athletically, and received a scholarship to go to West Point and played Army football. Was commissioned as a U.S. Army officer. Unfortunately, was medically discharged due to a knee injury I sustained. And ultimately, after all of that experience, I hearkened back to this notion of the American dream that you mentioned earlier. For those who, I think the American dream is most appealing to those who are not Americans.
Yeah.
And so because I was a newly minted American, I wanted to pursue this thing called the American dream. And so after reading books and research and realizing, man, 75 to 80% of Americans became wealthy through or due to real estate, maybe I ought to consider real estate, right? And so that's when my pursuit began.
Awesome. Yeah, I think definitely, even not knowing that you're an immigrant, I just found that out right now. But you're the type of guy
let's toast to that. I'm wondering, when do we get to these drinks?
Yeah, we got to get to them.
That's good. Oh, that's good.
But yeah, you're definitely a guy that, stands out and kind of has a chip on his shoulder, I think. And a lot of people, like the attorney last night, a lot of people speak very highly of you. For me personally, it was great working with you. You're a very analytical guy. I think you have a great skill set, especially when it comes to putting the right people around you. You're very good at assembling teams, different deals, have different teams. You partner with different people, and I think they each bring, kind of their own skill set into the deal. So talk to me kind of about how you go about finding these people. What makes someone a good candidate for a potential partner on a deal?
Yeah. So I think there's something to be said about Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers and putting in your 10,000 hours, right? And that's how you reach competency. I am lacking in a lot of different areas, but where I'm lacking, I bring people into the fold. And so that's really how I make up for those lack of 10,000 hours, is by bringing people who know what they're doing in that respective area. So for example, we started buying hotels here recently. I don't know anything about hotel other than how to sleep in one.
Right.
and yet we've partnered with, hotel developers, hotel operators who have been in that space for 25, 30 years, and that they know it like the back of their hand. And so we're able to sort of bring our collective expertise and experiences together, me with, raising capital, engaging with local municipalities, salesmanship, negotiations, those types of things are critical to any deal. And yet the actual specific expertise as it relates to that particular property, I don't necessarily have to. I need to know enough to be deadly,
right.
But I can rely on them to bring their expertise to the table. And so really it's a lot of introspection about, okay, what am I good at and what do I like to do, versus those things I don't like to do and things that I'm not good at. I need to bring people on my team who can meet those needs, who are much better than I am at certain things, and that love doing those things. I hate checking email, all right? My executive assistant loves going through and sorting and organizing, and that's great, and that's part of the reason why she's on the team, right? So, yeah, I think it's just understanding what your capabilities are, and I think some of that stems back to my military experience, right? It's just understanding, okay, this is the mission, these are your resources, this is who you have as far as team is concerned. These are subordinate leaders. Here's the capital equipment and munitions and supply and everything else. But what am I lacking, and who do I need to partner with in order to be able to achieve that mission?
Yeah. I mean, same here. With my company, getting the right people around me has been crucial, has been very helpful in our growth. I'm not a extrovert, I would say, even though I'm on here doing a podcast. But so a lot of the guys around me, my team, salespeople, they're great at what they do. I'm very good at the back end stuff, and the finance aspect of it. But how much do you attribute to the military for your success in real estate? How many of those skills kind of transferred over, and you think was really helpful for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because many of my classmates from West Point now are have pinned on full bird. So in other words, they're colonels in the Army, right? Which is one of the higher level positions that you can attain, and so they clearly have far more military experience than I do, having transitioned out of the military even as a lieutenant. And so what I will say, though, is that the 4 years at West Point are often called a leadership laboratory,
right?
Because there is a system and a process to take someone who has never led anything other than maybe themselves. Maybe they might have been, many of the people there are captains of football teams and hockey and different sports, valedictorians and everything else. And so you get there and you're middle of the pack,
right.
And you're just in a sea of highly qualified individuals. And through that experience of learning and diversity of different skill sets and experiences and opportunities, I mean, it's highly experiential, right? Everything from the military training over the summers through how things are set up during the academic year, through some of the physical requirements in terms of gymnastics and boxing. And some people have never been hit in the face, and so it's sort of important to know how do I react when I'm hit in the face, and do I cower in the corner, or do I come out swinging, right? So a lot of those things are ways to sort of not just measure your level of grit and fortitude, but to build some of that may be lacking. So I think a lot of what you maybe have seen or heard about as far as I go, and sort of my attributes and my character is stems from that for sure. But as far as actual military experience, I had all of 2 years to practice things I had learned in the leadership laboratory, which were foundational for me in terms of building upon that into my civilian career. But I think for me, it mostly stems from my experience as a cadet at West Point.
Yeah, I liked how you brought that up, getting punched in the face. It's that quote that everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And
Great philosopher Mike Tyson.
That's for business, I think that's huge. Execution. Everybody's got an idea, and there's a dime a dozen. Ideas are not the hard part, as you know. It's really executing, putting the team together, going through the motions, and getting after it. So, and there's a lot of punches, so to speak, that come your way when you're running a business. So,
absolutely.
So talk to me about after you got out of the military. What was right after that? Did you go straight into real estate? Did you go into another business?
Yeah, I know, that's a great question. So because of the injuries I sustained playing football and as a cadet, I was inspired really by the great care that I received in hospitals and the healthcare system within the military to pursue a career in healthcare. And so that's exactly what I did. What I didn't know was one of the first jobs I would have was selling drugs from the back of my car legally. I had no idea that pharmaceutical sales was a thing,
right.
And really enjoyed that, excelled at it. I was convinced by my first manager that leadership, which I had some good experience in education, was equivalent to or synonymous with sales. And I needed some convincing, but ultimately he said it's all about influencing, right? If effectively in leadership or sales, you're influencing other people to make decisions and do things that they may not otherwise choose to do in and of themselves.
Right.
And so because I was able to leverage that leadership experience in sales, I was able to be successful and things like that. Ultimately decided to pursue further education, got an MBA, got a full ride scholarship to the UT Macomb School of Business here, and continued in healthcare, but on the operations side within the health insurance space. I wanted to get that. I had aspirations to sort of seek a corner office within healthcare. Ultimately, obviously, that's not what happened here, but I wanted to pursue that experience. And then ultimately, the closest that I, as a non-clinician, could get to a patient was working for a provider. So I worked for 3 different dialysis companies, in fact. And so I led teams of up to 500 nurses all across the country. I think 130 hospitals at one point I had contracts with and had managed those relationships. Nurses on call for patients who would otherwise not be able to live, literally absent of the treatment that they would receive from the nurses that I cared for, and then that my nurses in turn cared for them. And so that was highly fulfilling, highly demanding. And I continued to increase in my earning potential and different roles and things like that. And that's really what sort of brought me to real estate as I was getting blessed with these opportunities. Uncle Sam kept taking more and more of my money. So I said, I got to figure out a way to try to retain more of the money that I'm making. And after more and more research, it was like, okay, I had explored this real estate thing right when I got out of the Army, didn't have the best experience, and put real estate investing on hold for the next 15 years to focus on my corporate career, and then realized at the end of that time period, man, this real estate thing, if we're gonna pursue that, knowing that that's still a valid and solid means to create wealth and mitigate taxes, that we got to do it the right way. And so that's when my wife and I sort of bought into a real estate education program, dropped some coin on that, but it was also what helped reset the foundation for learning how to do what we do now, initially on the residential side, but ultimately moving into the commercial side.
Okay, and I assume that kind of made you lean towards the medical office buildings a little bit with that experience in healthcare.
Well, what's interesting is that only recently has it come full circle to pursuing medical office buildings. Is again, we've been reading the tea leaves as to what is in high demand, because that's ultimately what we want to do with these buildings that we want to convert from their existing use to something else, is understanding what is in high demand in that local market. In many places, because there's a lot of people who are aging everywhere, medical is a really solid play. But in the same way that, quarterback receives the ball from the center, you go through your progressions, right? And so the first pass that you might look for might be medical office building. Well, if it's already oversaturated with surgical centers, for example, that might not be the right play. What about dialysis centers? What about infusion centers for oncology and other things? And then if none of that works, well, what about self-storage or apartment buildings or business co-working? There's a range of different things. It all comes down to what is in high demand and what is is there a way to get the city behind that project? Public-private partnerships, in other words. And so 2 of our deals right now, in fact, are effectively public-private partnerships where the city is providing a level of funding, so incentives, through grants, but then also property tax abatement, et cetera, in order to help support that project. We like to structure our deals in a way where the success of that project is not dependent on those incentives, but rather is just gravy on top. Maybe allows us to return capital to investors sooner than expected as a nice surprise to them. And if nothing else, provides buffer in terms of risk mitigation and project overruns and things like that, that you really need to incorporate into what you're doing, just because many construction projects, if not all of them, tend to go over budget and over time. Mm-hmm. And so preparing for the worst is part of the planning process for us.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting how you're doing that, because you're going at it kind of backwards than compared to most real estate investors. So you're finding the building and then kind of going through this process of elimination. You know, if it doesn't work for a medical office building, you may look at a hotel, you may look at multifamily. So when you're looking at certain deals, what kind of, I know you're looking at vacant buildings, but are there certain markets you're looking at, certain, price per square foot? Are you looking at replacement costs? Kind of talk to me about your strategy.
Yeah, before I address that, let me say something else too, because I think there's value in specializing in a certain property asset class. Mm-hmm. But we're deliberately being generalists, right? I don't need to be, and this goes back to what I said earlier in terms of competency in your 10,000 hours. I don't need to be the hotel developer or the multifamily specialist with 2,000-3,000 units. That's not our jam. What we would like to do is to identify the property and bring the capital that we need, but then partner with the people who will execute and who bring that added level of expertise for that particular asset. Okay, so that's one thing I should know, which is to your point, being backwards. I wouldn't necessarily call it backwards. It's certainly different from how other people do it, but being highly specialized, for example, in multifamily right now, a lot of operators have found themselves in a little bit of a pickle as mortgage rates have increased and they didn't have rate caps in place, right? A lot of their properties are bleeding cash. It's much more difficult for them to pivot to retail or industrial warehouse or hospitality because they're the multifamily guys, right? Whereas we're generalists. And so that's the one thing that should be noted. As relates to, how we're going about finding the buildings or sort of criteria that we're looking at, our investment fund, what we promote is that it will generate a 15% IRR over a 5-year term, and which equates to a doubling of investors' capital over 5 years, right? And so what we like to do is look for assets that do exactly that, which means that if we're producing a 15% investor level IRR, then because of the split structure that we have, the waterfall structure, then we've got to be looking at ones that on a project level will produce 18% or more, okay? And so to us, as an example, this medical office building that I referenced that we're looking to close here soon, it has 3 units in it, right? We negotiated the pricing such that even if we only ever have those 2 units that will be leased from the jump, that our investors will be able to double their money within a 5-year term. So we'll meet our investor objectives. If we do in fact lease that 3rd unit, which we're already starting to do even before we close on the property, then our investors will triple their capital. Okay, and so for us, it's less about price per square foot or even cap rate that we're buying at. There's something to be said about sort of the delta between the purchase cap rate and the interest rate and things like that. 150 bips is what we typically as a starting point will like to target. But at the same time, again, going back to sort of negotiations and the value of that, ultimately what we like to do is engage with whomever the seller is to understand what their objectives are, to see if we can even meet those objectives. right? So we're actually pursuing a lot of sale leasebacks right now of medical office buildings. Some of those don't necessarily require a conversion from an existing property to another because they will continue to occupy those. Some of them have already been converted, like this medical office building that I referenced used to be a Best Buy retail store, and now it's a surgery center and a pain clinic and a vacant unit. But ultimately, what we're looking to do is trying to assess what the needs are. So we're looking at one, for example, right now where the ask price is $7 million, and they're willing to do a 15-year lease back at a certain rate, right? Absolute triple net lease, no landlord responsibilities. Well, we ran the numbers, and those numbers don't work, right? In order for us to meet $7 million, then what we would need to have in terms of a lease rate is like $6 more per foot than they're willing than they've offered in their as part of the package. So it's either one or the other. Like what I would tell them is I can meet your price if you're willing to meet my lease terms. If you are stuck on the lease terms that you've included here, then we'll have to adjust the price.
Right.
And so it's sort of a conversation to understand, can we even meet your needs? If so, then hey, let's do a deal. If we can't, no problem. Good luck. We've got plenty of other deals to pursue.
Great. So you're more about, when it comes to negotiations, not just focusing on the price, but different terms and different ways you could structure the deal.
Absolutely.
So what would you say is kind of the hardest part about putting together a deal? Is it raising the capital? Is it, making the deal pencil, depending on what asset class you go with, or, putting the team together? What, in your opinion?
It's interesting because depending on the market cycle, there's a different answer for that, right? Right now, capital formation, whether you're talking debt or equity, is a major constraint. In times past, it was deal flow. Mm-hmm. We have no problem with deal flow right now. Capital constraints, however, have been an issue, right? On the debt side, for example, finding good loans for the acquisition of vacant office buildings is sort of non-existent.
Right.
Very challenging to find that, and understandably so. Many lenders have distressed office on their books already, so they're afraid that regulators are going to look at that and say, well, wait a second, you have this much on your books, and yet you're looking to bring on another office. And even when they believe in our business plan to convert it to a hotel or to a business co-working center, until it's not. And so there's a risk there that they would have to be willing to sort of come alongside us and take on, and many are not doing that right now. And so what that does is opens the door for other debt sources. Some are debt funds, alternative, private credit financing, et cetera. And so, if it's a good fit, then that's one that we'll explore and we'll proceed with. There's something to be said as well during an election year with regards to equity and how tightly people are holding on to their money. There's concerns about what's going to happen with the economy, depending on who's in the White House and things like that. And so, those are some of the reasons why folks might hold back in terms of deploying capital right now. Fortunately, our company, we did execute an LOI for a significant capital infusion, which will enable us to acquire not just the deals in this first fund that we launched, but in the subsequent fund. This first fund is a $20 million fund. The follow-on fund's a $100 million fund. So we've actually gotten an investment commitment for the entirety of that amount from a private equity firm. And so we were just discussing earlier this morning about what the next steps are and when we should receive funding and things like that. But that's going to open up the door in a major way for us to be able to continue to acquire and then execute these. At that point, the only question is, okay, which lenders are we going to partner with to try to close on these types of deals? Or, like some of these office deals, are we going to need to acquire it all cash, stabilize it, and then refinance and put leverage on after the fact? So there's a couple of options, but I would say capital formation, certainly in this market, is one of the biggest constraints.
Right. And I'm excited what you're going to do with that big capital infusion. That's exciting. Before this, who were you primarily raising capital from? Were they just wealthy individuals? Were they doctors, lawyers? What kinds of people were these?
Yeah, I think retail investors folks that range from being accredited investors and some who may not have been, utilizing some of the offering types that the SEC makes available. 506B, 506C. So most of our deals have been 506B offerings up until this last year. And in that structure, as you know, we've been permitted to allow up to 35 non-accredited investors. And so many of those folks are, family, friends, folks who are not high net worth individuals. But part of our mission is to be able to help folks like that to become accredited investors. And so even with this capital infusion that I mentioned, we have discretion to allocate a portion of the fund to non-accredited investors. And so it'll be sort of a parallel fund, if you will, where we have non-accredited investors who can come in and then co-invest alongside this large capital partner in order to have a co-ownership interest in those deals that we acquire. And so that really speaks to me, again, knowing my upbringing and my background. Folks like my own mom who are not accredited investors, but may have some available here and there to be able to invest in these deals. I mean, I've come across folks just within the last week who have hundreds of thousands of dollars available to deploy, and yet because they're not an accredited investor, can't invest with us based on the current offering that we have, which is a 506C offering. And so that's highly frustrating for them as it is for us. They're grateful when I tell them, hey, we're going to create a way in the future for you to be able to participate, but it's good that we're meeting now because I need to be able to document that we have a substantive relationship before you invest. And so, part of the reason why I come to networking events like the one you hosted yesterday evening is to be able to meet more and more people so I can help them, and so that they're eligible to invest in our deals.
Right. And then that was going to lead me into my next question, actually, was, once you tap into that family and friends kind of round, how are you going out and meeting new prospective investors? Is it conferences? You mentioned networking events. Are you doing a lot of those? And who's kind of taking the lead on that on your team? Is it mainly you doing the capital raising?
Yeah. So my business partner and I have a really great arrangement. Michael is a class of 2003 from West Point. He manages the day-to-day of everything related to our business. So marketing, investor relations, operations, fund administration, all of those things, he gets to deal with that, and he's really good at it. I'm more sort of front-facing, front man of the band, if you will, which involves capital raising, which involves acquisitions and deal finding. I do have an acquisitions manager who's also a West Point grad, MBA as well, who is a commercial real estate broker. And so those are mostly the responsibilities that I have. And then with regards to capital raising is, the one-on-one conversations with folks, but then also, speaking at different events, coming on podcasts like we're doing right now, and really networking and being in and around the community and identifying more and more people who are seeking to invest or deploy capital. That's really what I find myself doing a lot of these days.
Yeah, it's a grind for sure, and I think that's kind of the obstacle for most people to get started in real estate investing is the lack of capital. So usually that leads to getting into single family houses, getting into fix and flips, smaller deals at first. If someone wanted to, go out there and launch a fund, what advice would you give? What would be a good starting point for that?
Yeah, I get this question a lot because I in all the spare time that I have, I serve as a real estate coach for a Christian real estate education program, and so I'm often fielding questions about how do I get into commercial real estate, investment funds, and things like that. I think for me, it all starts with education as a means of mitigating risk, because this thing can be highly risky. Like anything else, crossing the street is highly risky if you don't know that you got to look both ways before you cross.
Right.
I think the more that you know about something, the more you get to understand, the more people that you have around you who know even more than you, advisors, professionals. I mean, that's really the way to do it. So for someone wanting to learn about investment funds or syndications. There's education programs around available that you can pursue that. The cheapest way to do it is to go to old reliable YouTube University and start researching information. Obviously, you got to be careful because not everything that you see on the internet is actually true, and so you got to be judicious about the information that you take in. But by and large, there's enough information there that sort of lines up with other sources of information that says, oh, okay, well, first thing I should know is what different investment types are. What is a 506B and a 506C? That's under this thing called a Reg D. Well, what's the difference between a Reg D and a Reg A? Some of that is, again, just learning. I will say that I think the more important thing in the entirety of the process is first getting accustomed to deal finding. You can't do anything else. It doesn't matter what a 506B, C, D, X, Y, Z is, unless you have a deal, right? And it doesn't matter whether you can raise money or get a loan if you don't have a deal to raise money for, right? And so really getting good sort of on the upstream part of it and figuring out, well, how do I find a deal and how do I determine if it's a good deal? How do I develop that skill set? And that part is key, right? And so, that comes with a little bit of nuance too, and practice and things like that, engaging with commercial real estate brokers, and ultimately either, again, pursuing some level of education that may cost. You're going to pay your tuition one way or the other. Either pay up front and pay 30, 40, 50K to get into some of these education programs, or you may lose money along the process, and that's your street MBA, right? I would rather avoid the pain, and that's exactly what we did by investing in this. And the other thing that I have found by investing in some of these education programs is when you do that, you also get into the same room as many other people who are pursuing the same thing. And what I find is there's three level, I call them the 3 C's. There's three different considerations when determining how do I engage in this space. The first is capacity, like how much time do you have to dedicate? The next is capital, and then the third is courage, right? Well, how intensive do I want management to be, and how willing am I to deal with tenants, termites, and the whole nine? If I don't have a lot of capacity because I'm a busy professional, and yet I have a lot of capital, then maybe I partner with someone who has the inverse relationship, right? They've got a lot of capacity, maybe they got laid off, and they don't have any capital, but they can be the boots on the ground driving things, and I'm sort of partnering with them being the capital source. And so ultimately, when it's all said and done, it's about partnership and relationship. And so none of us can do it alone. I mean, it goes back to one of the things that you said at the beginning as far as building teams.
Yeah. So in summary, kind of your philosophy here is invest in yourself before trying to look at deals and others. Use that money to get some education, go out there, meet some people, and start getting involved in the community.
Yeah.
Where do you have certain, I know from my company, I like to have certain milestones and, goals in different time periods. Where do you have some of that in your company? Where do you see you guys as in 5 years, maybe 10 years?
Yeah. So assuming that we don't receive any additional funding beyond what I described here today, 120, we can take 120 million and have 500 million assets under management within 3 to 5 years, right? And that's just based on the pipeline that we have right now. I mean, that's exactly what we're raising capital for, the deals that we have in that pipeline. 10 years from now, who knows? I think there's some desire that I have where instead of just being the owner of the properties, in addition to being the owners of the properties, that we perhaps have an ownership interest in the operating entity. So whether it's a surgery center or a medical office operator of some type, Chipotle restaurant, as a franchisee or something like that, maybe coming alongside our would-be tenant to say, hey, this is what the lease structure looks like, but guess what? We also offer investment into your operations, and we can have a 10 or 20% ownership interest there, right? And now we're more fully aligned with the success of your operation, right? And so moving into that private equity space, I think at some point in the future, and perhaps even earlier upstream with VC, is something that I'd like to explore.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that would be definitely unique, taking the ownership interest in some of the operating businesses in your properties. Let's talk about your track record, because I know you have a great track record with your investors. Would you say, maybe prospective investors listening, how have those returns looked for your current investors on, I know you guys have a couple deals getting ready to really ramp it up here, but how has that been going so far?
So if I play back sort of the most recent transactions on backwards, the most recent transaction, so we've had a 22% average annualized return. We've had a 66% average annualized return. We had 1%. I'm sorry. We had one deal that was severely affected by COVID. And here's the other thing that I would say. It's so interesting to me. I used to be embarrassed talking about one particular deal that went south. And for anybody who's in this seat who will claim that they've never lost money or they've never had a bad deal, you just haven't been in it long enough. Right. And interestingly, I've had investors who have heard me tell this story want to invest with me not only because I experienced this drawback and setback. Part of that is me sharing how we maintained a high level of communication, as well as my commitment to make investors whole on this particular deal. And we've started to do that already, and we've got other deals that will help us fully satisfy that. But that's an unusual, uncommon thing within this space. Like, people are expected to wear their big boy pants and big girl pants to the table when they invest and they write a check. All of that equity could be lost, and there's sort of an expectation. And if it does, then that's sort of part of the game. I just don't like that feeling, and I want people to rest assured that when they invest with me, that I'm protecting and safeguarding that money better than my own. And if something happens, that we'll make good on that and make folks whole, right? And so there was a situation with a property that we acquired that was severely impacted by COVID. Ultimately, was taken back by the bank, and that was one of the most depressing times of my life, honestly. But I also wouldn't take it back, believe it or not, just because all the learnings and all the lessons from that experience have informed how we do business now and how disciplined we are with underwriting and how readily we'll pass on those types of deals. And also part of the reason why we pivoted from Class C value add multifamily, just because of how intensive it is. The question is, why would we pursue sort of the 24/7 active, highly intensive life that is required to manage a property like that versus doing a 10-year absolute triple net lease where all we do is check to see if the rent check hit on the first of every month via ACH. It's just two different worlds. Right. And so, those are some of the considerations. I mean, in total, investors have been highly satisfied with what we've been able to produce, and so we had one deal within the last 8 months where we produced a 50% return for investors within a matter of 18 months. So yeah, I mean it's been great, not at all times, but definitely up and to the right. And then the setbacks that we've had, we've recovered from those and have remained in the game and have opportunities to take care of our investors. So.
Yeah, and a lot of limited partners actually, prefer their GPs to have gone through something like that. I've seen a lot of them, my clients, older guys who were doing this back in 07, 08 through the bust. Yeah. Lost everything, started back up, learned to kind of took their punches, so to speak, learned everything, and now are doing a lot better of a job. Someone that's claiming that they have a perfect track record and can't miss is kind of hard to believe, and you don't learn from your wins, you learn from your losses, kind of like Absolutely. What you said.
Yeah.
So with your investors, to kind of piggyback off that, you're very transparent. I mean, how often are you communicating with them? I know it varies. You know, some probably want to be more involved than others. But what's kind of your process dealing with the investors once they've already committed, they're in the fund?
Sure. Yeah. So we'll take questions and calls at any time. Obviously, there's a process of doing that in terms of setting up calls. However, during a construction phase, we'll send out a monthly investor update. Once the property is stabilized, we shift to a quarterly update, right? And so those updates will talk about where we are in terms of construction and lease up or stabilization and things of that nature. Recently, we've started to incorporate more sort of industry-wide news as well, because I think it's been helpful for us to receive that for investments that we make. But we wanted to be able to provide that the same way to our investors so that they can see within the context of the broader industry how this particular asset is performing, trending, even in the midst of construction. And so, you know, if there's numbers or if there's data with regards to, you know, absorption of multifamily, for example, or new units coming online, well, it's good to sort of know that with the backdrop, with that as the backdrop in light of the construction that we're doing. If there's a continued housing shortage and we're preparing to put 100 new units online, that's sort of good to know, you know. Mm-hmm. So, but as far as cadence goes, yeah, monthly investor updates during construction phase, and then once it's stabilized, we shift to quarterly.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. So very, very transparent with them.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. So I think you mentioned the first kind of Armor fund is closed. When is the second one gonna open up and you're gonna be actively? I know you have this infusion coming in, but a piece of that is gonna be reserved for some others that want to get in. Yeah. When is that gonna be available to some investors?
Yeah. So to clarify, we plan on closing the first fund at the end of the year. Okay, so it's more around timing. So Fund 1, Fund 2, really the difference is the deals that we're closing in 2024, or I should say before 2025, mm-hmm. are all Fund 1. Come 2025 and beyond, those are Fund 2 deals. There are some deals that we have now that we still have room for investors to come alongside us to invest in prior to us receiving this large amount of funding. And so that would be sort of a selfish plug there would be, if there's an interest in deploying some capital, especially, you know, towards the second half of the year, people are starting to look, especially if they've had a good year.
Right.
Tax benefits. That's one of the things I love about these projects and these investments. Then we do still have room now for folks to come in. Once the funding comes in from our private equity partner, we likely won't have an immediate need. Probably mid-year next year is when we'll start to open up for for additional investors, whether they be accredited or non-accredited. But that won't be probably until middle of the year, simply because we won't have a need for additional capital. But as I mentioned before, I mean, it's on my heart to want to create opportunities for people. But from a timing perspective and all the deals that we're starting to acquire, we'll probably need some time in order to be able to open those additional funds up. So mid-year next year. So the window of time right now really is for folks who come in really over the next 30 to 60 days. And then if folks don't come in during that time, it likely won't happen until summer of next year that we'll have opportunities yet again.
Right. Well, man, I think we can wrap it up. I really appreciate you coming on. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I know you dropped some gems for everybody, and I'm super excited to see everything that's gonna come to fruition for you.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Thanks,
I appreciate
man.
That.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Congratulations on launching this. I think for those who are watching from the sideline, seeing folks like yourself who are actively in the game and wanting to advance and create awareness for the things that you do, and then highlight people like myself who are also in the arena. I mean, that's just a great example for what we all should be doing. It's like, if you see something that you want to change, do something about it and get in the game. And so that would be my recommendation, whether it's real estate or anything else. Right. And if I can be of ever any assistance, redeeminvestments.com is our website. you can reach out to us directly there, or send a message via email at investors with an S at redeeminvestments.com.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Everyone, please like, comment, subscribe, and see you next time.
Thanks, guys.